John Carter stepped off the bus with his duffel bag slung across his shoulder, the autumn wind biting at his skin. For a year, he had dreamed of this moment. Coming home, back to quiet streets and familiar walls. No gunfire. No orders barked in the dead of night. No sand choking the air. Just Ohio skies and the smell of wet leaves. Yet as he drew closer to his neighborhood, something gnawed at him. The strange stillness of his own anticipation. The question of whether home had waited for him as faithfully as he had waited for it. Emily stood by the porch when he turned onto their street. She waved, her smile wide, but her fingers twisted the hem of her sweater like a nervous child's. John's chest ached at the sight of her, still beautiful, still his, but her eyes carried a weight he didn't remember. He dropped the duffel bag and she rushed into his arms. For a moment, the world blurred into warmth and the smell of her hair. God, I missed you, John whispered, clutching her like he feared she might vanish. I missed you too, Emily replied, her voice soft but trembling. Inside, the house was spotless, too spotless. The framed pictures gleamed as if freshly polished, and a faint scent of lemon cleaner lingered. John sat at the table, running his hand over the wood grain. It felt familiar, but also staged, like someone had tried to freeze time for his arrival. He tried to ignore it. You've lost weight, Emily said, setting down a plate of roast chicken. You need a real meal, John smiled faintly. Army food doesn't exactly fatten you up. He studied her carefully. The way she avoided his eyes, the way she laughed too quickly when he told a story about the desert. He wanted to believe it was just nerves, the adjustment of being together again. But his instincts, a soldier's instincts, told him there was more. Later, when he unpacked his bag in the bedroom, he noticed small changes. A new throw on the bed, a pair of curtains he hadn't seen before. Nothing out of place, yet everything faintly unfamiliar. You've been busy, he said casually. Emily, folding one of his shirts, froze just long enough for him to notice. I just wanted the house to feel nice for you. Her words were right, but her tone, hesitant, guarded, hung between them like smoke. That night, John lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Emily's breathing beside him was steady, but he couldn't shake the impression of distance. He thought about the desert nights when he'd longed for her voice, her touch. Now here she was, close enough to reach out and hold, yet she felt 1,000 miles away. Em, he whispered into the dark. She stirred. What is it? Everything feels different. Emily turned, her face half-shadowed. Of course it does. You've been gone so long. We'll get used to each other again. John nodded, but her answer didn't quiet the storm inside him. Different wasn't just distance. Different was change, and change always came with consequences. Outside, the street lamps hummed, casting pale light through the curtains. The house, though familiar, seemed to breathe with secrets. The warmth of reunion was already cooling into something fragile. John closed his eyes, trying to summon peace, but the question gnawed at him still. What had shifted in his absence? And why did Emily's embrace feel both like homecoming and warning? The days that followed should have been filled with laughter, relief, and rediscovery. Instead, John found himself adrift in a house that felt more like a museum than a home. He noticed the distance in small ways at first. Emily brushing past him in the kitchen without lingering. Her smile flashing quickly before fading. Her hands trembling slightly when he reached to hold them. At night, she often turned away from him in bed, claiming exhaustion. Her body curled toward the wall, leaving John staring at the back of her head, wondering when their intimacy had become something fragile, something withheld. He told himself it was normal, that a year apart would naturally change the rhythm of closeness. But his instincts told him it was something more deliberate. The unease deepened when he began hearing whispers, soft, hushed words in the hallway after midnight. The glow of a phone screen beneath the crack of the bedroom door. When Emily thought he was asleep, John lay motionless, pretending to dream, every nerve in his body on alert. The sound of her voice, gentle, almost tender, wasn't directed at him. That truth sank like a stone in his chest. One morning, as Emily brewed coffee, John leaned against the counter and studied her carefully. Who were you talking to so late last night? Her spoon clattered against the mug. What are you talking about? I heard you, whispering. Emily forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. John, I couldn't sleep. I was scrolling on my phone. Maybe I read something out loud without realizing. John nodded slowly, though the explanation rang hollow. He said nothing more, but the seed of suspicion had been planted, roots pushing deeper with every uneasy silence. The tension broke one evening at dinner. Emily had made pasta, setting the table with care, as though the appearance of normalcy might erase the undercurrent between them. John twirled his fork absently, watching her avoid his gaze. "So," he began, voice measured, "what's next for us? I mean, now that I'm back, we can start planning again. Maybe a trip. You mentioned wanting kids before I left." Emily's fork froze halfway to her mouth. For a moment, the only sound was the tick of the kitchen clock. She set the utensil down, her hands folded too neatly. "I think we should just take it slow," she said. John frowned. "Take it slow? We've been married 5 years, Em. What are we slowing down for?" Her eyes flicked to his, then quickly away. "It's just, things feel different. We need time to adjust." John's voice hardened despite himself. "Different how? I came home expecting to pick up where we left off. But you're acting like I'm a stranger." "I'm not," Emily whispered, though her tone lacked conviction. "I just don't want to rush into anything." The silence that followed was louder than shouting. John stared at her, the woman he'd dreamed about through sandstorms and gunfire. And yet here she was, sitting across from him like a ghost of herself. That night, he lay awake again, listening to her steady breathing. His mind replayed every detail. The way she dodged questions, the way her phone never left her side, the way her laughter sounded hollow when friends visited. Love and suspicion collided inside him, each demanding allegiance. He thought about the desert again, about the discipline of waiting, about watching for patterns and small shifts that revealed danger. He had learned to trust his instincts, and his instincts told him Emily was hiding something. The house seemed colder now, shadows pooling in corners, silence pressing in like a weight. John turned onto his back, staring into the darkness. He knew he could no longer ignore it. Something was wrong, and whatever it was, it had already begun to erode the fragile foundation of their marriage. The morning sun spilled across the quiet suburban street as John stepped out onto the porch, a mug of lukewarm coffee in his hands. Across the lawn, Daniel Harris waved cheerfully while hauling a box of tools from his truck. John forced a smile, but his eyes lingered longer than his greeting. There was something in the man's ease, his comfort, that unsettled him. Inside, John found Emily at the window, watching Daniel too. She quickly turned away when she realized John had noticed. "Looks like he's fixing something again," John said, his tone carefully casual. Emily nodded. "Yeah, he's always helping out around here." The words slipped out too smoothly, as though rehearsed. John sipped his coffee, masking the bitterness that wasn't from the brew. That afternoon, John worked in the garage, the door cracked open. He caught sight of Emily stepping onto the driveway with Daniel. Their conversation carried just enough for John to hear laughter. Soft, familiar, easy. Emily hadn't laughed like that with him since he'd come home. He set down the wrench, his knuckles whitening. Later, as Emily prepared dinner, John asked, "You and Daniel seem close." She didn't look up from chopping vegetables. "He was kind while you were gone. Helped with the yard, fixed the fence. It wasn't easy being alone, John." Her tone wasn't defensive, but the weight of guilt hung between every word. John swallowed the knot rising in his throat. He wanted to believe her, but the image of her smiling at Daniel clung like a shadow. That night, lying in bed, memories of deployment flooded back. The endless desert, the silence after firefights, the way survival often meant trusting the smallest signs. He remembered the letters Emily sent, warm words that promised loyalty and longing. He clung to them in the field, believing they tethered him to home. But now, watching her turn away from him again, he wondered if those letters had masked another truth. The next morning, John crossed paths with Daniel at the mailbox. "Welcome home, John," Daniel said with a grin. "Emily must be glad to have you back." There was no malice in his voice, but the way he said her name cut deep. John nodded stiffly, replying, "Yeah, it's been a long time." For a moment, their eyes locked, and John sensed something beneath the friendliness, an awareness, unspoken but heavy. He carried the weight of it all day. Flashbacks intruded whenever John tried to rest. He pictured Emily and Daniel together during his absence. The dinners, the repairs, the quiet companionship she'd never mentioned in her letters. He saw her leaning on Daniel the way she used to lean on him. Each thought gnawed at the edges of his sanity. One evening, while Emily folded laundry, John sat across from her, voice low. "Did you ever need him more than you needed me?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Emily froze, a shirt clenched in her hands. "John, don't start with this." "Then tell me I'm wrong," he pressed. Her silence was louder than denial. John looked away, his chest tightening. In her stillness, in the way she couldn't meet his eyes, he found the confirmation he dreaded. From that moment, the neighbor was no longer just a man across the street. He was a rival, an intruder in the fragile life John had fought to protect. Emily's silence, Daniel's comfort, it all coiled into something sharp and festering. And as night fell, John stood at the window watching Daniel's porch light flicker on. The shadow of suspicion had taken root, and it wasn't leaving. It began with a creak in the floorboards. John had been searching for a flashlight in the hallway closet when his hand brushed against a shoebox pushed far to the back, half buried beneath winter coats. The box wasn't dusty. It had been moved recently. Something about its weight felt wrong. He carried it to the bedroom, the silence of the house wrapping tight around him. When he lifted the lid, the air seemed to leave the room. Inside were bottles of prenatal vitamins, neatly stacked. Beneath them, folded carefully, were 2 ultrasound images. He stared at the grainy outlines, the unmistakable shape of a child, small and fragile in its mother's womb. His hands trembled as he traced the faint dates printed along the corner. His heart sank. The timing made no sense. John staggered backward, the box slipping from his grip and spilling across the floor. The vitamins rattled. The images fluttered like falling leaves. His pulse hammered in his ears. When Emily walked in moments later, her breath caught at the sight. Her face drained of color. "John, what are you doing?" He lifted one of the ultrasounds with shaking fingers. "Tell me this isn't real. Tell me this isn't what it looks like." Emily's lips parted, but no sound came. She reached for the image, but John pulled it back, his eyes blazing. "Whose child is this?" His voice cracked, raw and guttural. "It's not mine. I wasn't here. I wasn't even in this country." Her silence was an answer. His world tilted. Finally, she whispered, "It's Daniel's." The words sliced deeper than any battlefield wound. John stumbled as though struck, his chest constricting with disbelief. "Daniel?" he repeated, the name a bitter poison on his tongue. Emily stepped closer, tears filling her eyes. "I never meant for it to happen. You were gone so long. I was alone, scared. He was there. He helped when everything felt like it was falling apart." John's hands clenched into fists. "So while I was halfway across the world fighting for us, for you, you were here building a family with him." Her tears spilled over. "It wasn't like that. It wasn't planned. I didn't want this to happen." "You didn't stop it either," he shot back. His voice rose, echoing off the walls. "Every letter you sent me, every word about how you missed me, were those lies? Was it all just a performance while you carried his child?" Emily shook her head violently. "No, John, I love you. I still love you. But I can't undo what's already happened." He stared at her, his breath ragged. The ultrasound slipped from his hand, landing softly on the carpet between them. The faint outline of the child seemed to stare back at him, mocking the life he thought he had. "I gave everything to this marriage," he said, his voice breaking. "Everything. And the one thing I wanted most, a family, you gave to another man." Emily dropped to her knees, clutching the fallen image. "Please don't say that. It doesn't erase what we had. You're still my husband. I need you." He pulled away as she reached for him. "No, what you needed was him. And you made sure he gave you the one thing I couldn't while I was gone." The air between them thickened with grief and fury. John's sense of self, soldier, husband, protector, shattered into fragments he couldn't gather. Emily's sobs filled the silence, but he felt nothing but a hollow ache where love used to be. At last, he turned toward the door, his voice low and cold. "I don't even know who I am in this house anymore." Emily collapsed onto the floor, clutching the ultrasound to her chest, whispering apologies he could no longer hear. From the porch, John stared into the night, Daniel's porch light flickering faintly across the street. It was no longer suspicion, no longer silence. The truth was out, and it burned hotter than any fire he had known. John didn't sleep that night. He sat at the edge of the bed while Emily's quiet sobs faded into shallow breaths. The ultrasound picture lay on the dresser, turned face down. But no matter how he tried to shut his eyes, the image stayed burned into his mind. Each time he blinked, he saw the shadowy form of the child that wasn't his. At dawn, Emily stirred, her voice fragile, testing the silence. "We can still fix this." John turned slowly, his eyes bloodshot. "Fix this?" "Emily, there's nothing left to fix. You've destroyed us." She sat up, wrapping the blanket tightly around herself. "No, listen. It doesn't have to be the end. This child, it doesn't change who we are. We can raise it together. We can make it ours." The words sliced through him. "Ours?" His laugh was hollow, bitter. "You want me to pretend? To raise his child as my own? Do you hear yourself?" Emily's eyes filled with tears, but her tone sharpened, laced with desperate control. "You don't understand. I was alone. Do you know how many nights I cried myself to sleep while you were gone? How many mornings I woke up not knowing if you were alive? Daniel was there when you weren't. That doesn't mean I don't love you." John shook his head. "So it's my fault now? Because I left to serve my country, you found comfort in his arms. I'm saying you weren't here." Her voice cracked, then softened quickly, almost rehearsed. "But you are now. That's what matters. We can start over. This baby doesn't have to be a reminder of what went wrong. It can be a new beginning, John. Our beginning." Her words coiled around him, blurring the sharp edges of his rage with confusion. She spoke with such conviction, as if rewriting history in real time. But when he closed his eyes, he saw her laughing across the fence with Daniel. He heard the phantom sound of whispered conversations at midnight, the vibration of her phone she thought he hadn't noticed. He saw her hand resting protectively over her stomach, the small gesture that had once seemed innocent, now treacherous. That night he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Emily's breathing was steady beside him, but his thoughts raced like a storm. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind rattling the window became an echo of betrayal. He imagined Daniel in his kitchen, sitting at his table, holding Emily's hand. He imagined the child growing inside her, with another man's features, another man's claim. His mind replayed her words. "We can start over. This baby can be ours." They pressed against his skull until he could no longer tell if they were hers or his own desperate attempt to cling to something that had already shattered. By the third sleepless night, John was unraveling. He wandered the house in silence, pausing in doorways like a ghost. At the nursery they once talked about, he stood staring at the empty walls, remembering how they'd painted them soft yellow before his deployment. He had imagined his child's laughter filling that room. Now the echo of what could have been was unbearable. Emily followed him quietly one evening, her voice tender, coaxing. "John, please, don't let this break you. Don't let him win. You're stronger than this. We can survive it if you just choose to." Her words painted her as the victim, as though Daniel had stolen her, as though she hadn't chosen. She leaned into him, pressing her hand against his chest. "You're my husband. That's what's real, not him. Not the mistake." But John could feel her heartbeat thudding with fear, not devotion. And in that moment he realized she wasn't only trying to convince him, she was trying to convince herself. He looked down at her, hollow-eyed, his voice low. "You want me to live a lie," she whispered, almost pleading. "Sometimes lies are the only way to survive." The words lingered like poison. That night, John closed his eyes but saw only Daniel's shadow stretching across their lives. And as Emily drifted into uneasy sleep beside him, John stared into the dark, knowing something inside him had snapped. And there would be no going back. The days blurred into one long, hostile silence. What began as subtle unease had erupted into open warfare. John and Emily's voices, once soft and filled with shared jokes, now ricocheted through the house like gunfire. The walls, once symbols of safety, seemed to shrink around them, holding the echoes of their venomous exchanges. "You think I don't see what you're doing?" John shouted one evening, fists clenched at his sides. "Every time I ask you a question, you twist it. Every time I try to make sense of this, of us, you act like I'm the monster." Emily's eyes flared, but her tone dripped with icy restraint. "You are making yourself the monster. "You're obsessed, John. You're tearing this house apart, not me." Her words stung because in his spiraling paranoia, he wondered if she was right. But then he would catch her glancing at her phone, her lips twitching with the faintest smile at unseen messages, and the fury would ignite again. The shouting became routine. Dinners ended in silence or broken plates. Nights ended with slammed doors and whispered threats neither of them fully meant, but both of them feared. The home smelled of stale arguments, suffocating, as though oxygen itself refused to linger. John's breaking point came on a damp, gray morning. He had seen Daniel outside, trimming the hedge as if nothing in the world were wrong. Their eyes met, and Daniel's smirk, subtle, knowing, set John's blood boiling. Without a word, he stormed across the lawn. "Enjoying yourself?" John's voice trembled, equal parts rage and restraint. Daniel looked up, wiping sweat from his brow. "Just keeping busy. Emily likes the yard neat." The words were casual, almost mocking. John's jaw tightened. "Stay away from her. From my house. From my family." Daniel's smile widened, cruelly deliberate. "Family? John, let's not kid ourselves. Emily came to me. She wanted comfort. She wanted someone here, not halfway across the world." John lunged, grabbing Daniel by the shirt, shoving him against the fence. "Say that again," he growled, his voice raw. But Daniel only chuckled, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "You can't undo it. You can't erase me. That child, our child, will always be a reminder, and there's nothing you can do about it." The words struck like bullets. John's grip tightened before he forced himself to release, stepping back, chest heaving. He wanted to end it right there, to wipe the smug grin from Daniel's face. But something inside whispered restraint. Too many eyes, too much risk. Emily had been watching from the window. When John returned, she was waiting, arms crossed, her face pale. "What did you do?" "What I should have done a long time ago," John snapped. "He's mocking us. He's mocking me. He's mocking you," Emily shot back, her voice trembling. "Because you let him. Because you're letting this consume you." "Consume me?" John barked a laugh, bitter and hollow. "You let him into our bed, Emily, into our lives. And you expect me to just stand here and pretend it didn't happen?" Tears welled in her eyes, but her words cut sharp. "I expect you to be a man about it. To decide if you're going to fight for this marriage or burn it down." John turned away, unable to meet her gaze. The air between them was thick enough to choke. Every word, every silence widened the gulf until it felt as though they lived on opposite sides of a battlefield, rather than under the same roof. At night, the house groaned under the weight of their hostility. Emily locked herself in the bedroom. John paced the living room, his hands shaking, his thoughts spiraling darker with each passing hour. He replayed Daniel's words. She wanted someone here, until they etched themselves into his skull. One evening, as the wind rattled the windows, John stood at the doorway of their bedroom. Emily lay curled on the bed, back to him, silent. He spoke into the darkness. "I can't breathe in this house anymore." Her voice came muffled through the pillow. "Then leave." But leaving was never truly an option. He couldn't escape the betrayal. He couldn't outrun Daniel's shadow or the unborn child binding them all together. The tension had built to a point beyond repair, and John knew it was only a matter of time before something snapped. The silence stretched, heavy and dangerous like the pause before a storm. And in that silence, John realized the breaking point wasn't ahead of them. They were already in it. The house was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that hummed with tension, the kind that wrapped around John's chest like a tightening rope. He sat at the kitchen table, head in his hands, the clock ticking louder with every second. Emily moved about the house in silence, her footsteps deliberate, her voice absent. For weeks their lives had been circling this moment, and John sensed something final was about to break. When Emily entered the kitchen, her face was pale, her shoulders squared. She didn't sit. She stood across from him, hands trembling as they clutched the back of a chair. Her eyes were rimmed red, yet her voice was steady. "John," she said quietly, "I can't do this anymore." The words landed heavier than bullets. He lifted his head, eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. "What do you mean by that?" "I mean," Emily continued, her breath shuddering, "I'm leaving. I can't keep pretending. I'll raise this baby with or without you. but I can't live in this house where every look feels like a punishment." Her confession stabbed deeper than the truth of the affair itself. Leaving meant finality. Leaving meant surrender. John's hands tightened around the edge of the table, knuckles whitening. "You're just going to walk away?" he whispered, voice breaking. "After everything I've sacrificed, after everything I've done for us, you're just done?" Emily's jaw quivered, but she held his gaze. "It's not about punishment anymore, John. It's about survival." Something inside him cracked. The words replayed in his mind. Survival. As though she were casting him as the danger, the threat. Heat rose in his chest, choking him. His vision tunneled, focused only on her defiant, tear-streaked face. The argument escalated quickly, words colliding like blows. "You betrayed me," John roared, rising from the chair so violently it scraped across the tile. "I was alone," Emily shouted back, tears spilling now. "You left me here with nothing but silence and shadows. And Daniel, he was here. He was present. You weren't," the name. Hearing it aloud ignited the firestorm he had fought so hard to contain. John's pulse thundered in his ears. His hands trembled as he stepped toward her, his voice breaking apart. "Don't you dare say his name to me." Emily shook her head, her own fury sparking through the grief. "You think anger will fix this? You think rage will erase what's been done? It won't, John. I'm leaving and you can't stop me." The words sealed his unraveling. He reached for her, not in tenderness but in fury. His hands closed around her wrists first, then moved instinctively, desperately, to her throat. Emily gasped, her eyes wide with shock as his grip tightened. She clawed at his arms, nails raking his skin. But his strength, honed by years in uniform, sharpened by rage, overpowered her resistance. "Don't leave me," he growled. Though the sound was broken, almost pleading, glass shattered when her hand flailed against the counter, knocking over a half-filled tumbler. The crash echoed through the room, fragments scattering like tiny shards of their fractured marriage. The smell of spilled liquor and broken glass filled the air. Emily's lips moved, trying to form words. "Please, John." But the sound was faint, strangled beneath his crushing hands. Her body writhed, her heels scraping against the tile. But with each passing second, her movements weakened. Time slowed. John could hear nothing but his ragged breathing and the desperate gasps slipping from her throat. Her eyes, once the soft brown that had welcomed him home, that had held laughter, tears, and promises, faded into glassy stillness. And then, silence. The silence was deafening. His hands, still trembling, released her, and her body crumpled to the floor with a dull final. The kitchen floor was still sticky with the memory of blood and broken glass when John forced himself to move. Hours had passed in a haze, though he could not measure them. Time felt suspended, cruel. Emily's lifeless form lay cold against the tile, her once vibrant body reduced to silence. He stared at her, hollow, his chest tight with something that wasn't grief and wasn't rage, but some twisted mixture of both. Then survival instinct took over. The soldier in him, trained to act under pressure, pushed aside the shattered husband. He lifted her body, dragging her with trembling arms, and wrapped her in a sheet. He staged the house in fragments, opening the front door as though she had left in anger, scattering objects to create the illusion of haste. He rehearsed his lies aloud, whispering them in the darkness. "We fought, she left. I don't know where she went. Morning came, but it did not bring clarity. It brought questions. Neighbors, drawn by the raised voices and the sound of glass shattering, had already begun whispering. Mrs. Turner from next door mentioned hearing a woman scream. Another neighbor recalled the front door slamming, but never seeing Emily leave. John smiled thinly, brushed off their curiosity, and repeated his story. She walked out after an argument. Needed space, but whispers spread faster than truth. By the third day, Emily's absence could not be ignored. Her co-worker, a kind-hearted friend named Allison, told police she had confided fears about John's temper and about Daniel, the neighbor who had been too close for comfort. When detectives arrived, John greeted them with the practiced calm of a man who had worn discipline like armor. Yet beneath the facade, sweat traced lines down his back. Detectives John Carter and Lisa Grant weren't fooled by surface appearances. They asked simple questions, let silence stretch after his answers, and watched how his eyes twitched or his jaw tightened. "Mr. Carter, when exactly did Emily leave?" Detective Grant asked, her voice steady. "Late evening," John replied, rehearsed words spilling too quickly. "She said she needed air." "She never came back." Detective Carter leaned forward. "Strange, isn't it, that none of your neighbors saw her walk out? They heard shouting, a scream, but no one saw her leave." The crack in his story widened. Then Daniel Harris entered the investigation. His testimony was a blade sharpened by guilt and resentment. He admitted to the affair, admitted the pregnancy, painting Emily not as a runaway, but as a woman torn between loyalty and survival. His words thrust John's worst fears into the open. "She told me she wanted to leave him," Daniel confessed, his voice low but clear. She was afraid of how he'd react. She was going to tell him that night. The timeline matched too well. Forensics soon unraveled the rest. Trace evidence in the kitchen told its own story. Blood wiped but not erased. Fibers clinging to the counter. John's scratched forearms where Emily had fought for breath. The soldier's discipline had failed against the forensic precision of modern investigation. When the trial began, the courtroom was a theater of broken lives. Emily's family sat with grief carved into their faces, their voices trembling as they described her loyalty, her kindness, her hope for the baby. Daniel sat apart, his presence both witness and wound, his testimony placing a final nail in the coffin of John's defense. The prosecution wove a story that felt undeniable. A man returned from war, unable to accept betrayal, who let rage dictate his actions. They spoke of his lies, his manipulations, his attempts to mask violence with control. The defense tried to frame him as broken by trauma, a veteran carrying invisible scars. They spoke of his sacrifice, his service, his years of duty. But the jury saw more than wounds, they saw choice. And choice had ended Emily's life. Closing arguments left the courtroom in silence. Then the jury returned, their verdict a single devastating word. Guilty. John did not cry. He did not beg. He did not even flinch. He sat stiffly, hands folded, eyes vacant. The hollowness that had begun in the kitchen now consumed him entirely. He had survived deserts and battlefields, lived through bullets and bloodshed. But in the quiet of his own home, he had lost the only war that mattered. The gavel struck. Final and cold, John Carter, once a soldier, now sat condemned not just by the court, but by the truth of a life destroyed from within.